The jacket was too big at the shoulders. I'd noticed it the moment I pulled it from the wardrobe that morning, standing in the gray Auckland light with Evelyn's perfume still faintly in the air. I'd bought it at a farmer's sale in $2,342, marked down from $85, and worn it exactly 3 times since. Once for my brother's retirement dinner, once for a neighbor's funeral, and now this. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and thought about how Evelyn would have laughed. Not cruelly. She never laughed cruelly at me. She would have smiled that quiet smile of hers, straightened the lapels with both hands and said, "You look perfectly fine, Graham. You always do." And I would have believed her, the way I believed everything she told me for 41 years. But Evelyn wasn't there to straighten my lapels anymore. She'd been gone for 11 days. I buttoned the jacket, picked up her photo from the bedside table, the one from Queenstown, 1987, where she's squinting into the sun and laughing at something I'd said, and I told her I'd be back by evening. Then I drove myself to the funeral home alone. Evelyn and I had met at a church social in Christchurch in the winter of 1981. She was 23, working as a school librarian. I was 26, an apprentice electrician with muddy boots and a second-hand ute. I'd borrowed a better jacket for that evening. I seemed to have spent my life borrowing or making do with jackets. And when she agreed to let me walk her to the bus stop, I told myself right then that I was going to marry that woman. It took me 14 months to convince her. She was sensible, Evelyn. She didn't rush into things. We married in March 1983, in a small ceremony at her parents' place in Remuera. Her mother made the wedding cake. I bought Evelyn's ring from a jeweler on Colombo Street who let me pay it off in installments. We went to Kaikoura for 3 nights for our honeymoon, because that was what we could afford. And we ate fish and chips on the beach in the dark and thought we were the luckiest people on earth. I think looking back we were right. We moved to Auckland in 1986 when the electrical work dried up in Christchurch. I started my own small contracting business. Nothing grand, just me and eventually 2 other fellows, doing residential and light commercial work across the North Shore. Evelyn went back to library work part-time once our daughter Melissa was old enough for school. We bought a modest house in Birkenhead in 1989, 3 bedrooms, a section that backed onto a reserve, a leaky tap in the laundry that I fixed myself on the first weekend and felt absurdly proud of. We lived carefully. That was the word Evelyn always used, not cheaply, not poorly carefully. We cooked at home most nights. We bought second-hand furniture and fixed it up. We went to Northland for holidays, not Fiji. We drove cars until they became genuinely unreliable, then bought used ones. We didn't have credit card debt. We put money aside every month. First into a savings account. Then, once I understood it better, into KiwiSaver. And a few modest investments that Evelyn had researched quietly and methodically over many years. Melissa grew up knowing we weren't wealthy. She knew because she saw the packed lunches and the handmade birthday cakes and the camping holidays at Tapotupotu Bay, where I burned the sausages every single year without fail. She knew because she saw her father drive a 2001 Toyota Corolla for 16 years. And she knew because we told her honestly, we don't waste, we don't show off, and we don't spend money we don't have. What Melissa did not know, what almost nobody knew, was what all those years of careful living had quietly become. I first noticed something was different about Melissa's husband, Brendan Forsyth. At their engagement party in 2014, Melissa had met him through work. She was in marketing by then, working for a mid-sized company in the CBD. Brendan was in commercial property buying and selling development sites across Auckland, making the kind of money that showed immediately in the way a man carries himself. He wore clothes that fit perfectly. He spoke with easy confidence about restaurants I'd never heard of and suburbs I'd never considered living in. He drove a new BMW, and replaced it every 3 years. At the engagement party, held at a wine bar in Ponsonby that charged $16 for a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, Brendan's parents flew up from Wellington. His father, retired, had been a property developer himself. His mother wore jewelry that caught the light. They were pleasant enough to me that evening, in the way that people are pleasant when they have decided in advance that you are beneath them and have resolved to be gracious about it. Brendan himself was polite to me then. He shook my hand. He called me Graham. He said he'd heard a lot about me. I believed him. I just wasn't sure what he'd heard. The wedding was in 2015, at a vineyard in Hawke's Bay. It was a beautiful day, I will always give it that. The vines were green and full. The sky was the particular blue that Hawke's Bay does better than anywhere. Evelyn wore a lavender dress she'd bought at a boutique in Takapuna and altered herself at home, and she looked, to my eyes, as lovely as she had in 1981. The wedding cost a great deal of money. Brendan's family contributed substantially, and they made sure people knew it. Our contribution was quieter. We gave Melissa and Brendan a check that represented 2 years of careful saving, and we gave them, wrapped in brown paper in a box that had originally contained a pair of my work boots, a quilt that Evelyn had been making for 3 years. It was made from fabric she'd been collecting since before Melissa was born. Remnants of curtains from our first flat, a piece of my old flannel shirt, a square cut from Evelyn's mother's apron, scraps of Melissa's baby clothes. Evelyn had sewn it all together by hand. In the evenings, while I watched television, and she sat quietly in her chair by the window, Brendan unwrapped it and said, "Oh, a blanket. That's sweet." He put it aside quickly. His mother glanced at it with an expression I recognized even from across the room. Evelyn squeezed my hand under the table. That night, in our room at the motel down the road, everyone else was staying at the Vineyard Lodge. But we'd thought the motel was perfectly comfortable and considerably cheaper. Evelyn said to me quietly, "The quilt will outlast him, Graham." I asked her what she meant. She just smiled and said, "Never mind. Go to sleep." In the years after the wedding, I noticed the shape of things settling into a pattern I didn't much like. Brendan and Melissa bought a house in Remuera, a large, modern place with a kitchen that seemed designed for photographing rather than cooking. They entertained regularly. They took overseas holidays twice a year. Brendan's business was doing well, by all outward appearances, and he talked about it often and at length. When they visited us in Birkenhead less and less frequently as the years passed, I saw Brendan look around our house with an expression that was not quite contempt, but was in that general direction. He would glance at the carpet, which was original to the house and showing its age. He would note the television, which was not large. He would observe the kitchen, which was functional and clean but not new, and I could see him calculating what he imagined our circumstances to be. He calculated poorly. At a family dinner in 2019, Melissa had turned 38 that year. He said something that I've thought about many times since. We were discussing a news story about the housing market. Auckland prices going where they always seem to be going. And Brendan was holding forth on strategy and leverage and the importance of not being, as he put it, too conservative with your assets. He looked at me and said pleasantly, "No offense, Graham, but people of your generation, tradespeople, you know, often don't make the most of what they could have built. A missed opportunity, really. But that's the era, isn't it? Different times." Evelyn set down her fork very carefully. Melissa looked at her wine. I said something mild and changed the subject. Later, driving home across the bridge, Evelyn sat with her handbag on her lap and looked out at the harbor lights. After a long while, she said, "I think that young man is going to be a problem, Graham." I told her I thought she might be right. "I want to talk to you properly," she said, "about some things. When we get home." But when we got home, she said she was tired and we'd talk at the weekend. And at the weekend, something else came up, and then the months moved on the way months do. And then last year, Evelyn got her diagnosis, and after that, there was no time for the conversation we'd meant to have. There was only the hospital, and the house, and the quiet, terrible arithmetic of days. She died on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. The harbor was visible from her window. I held her hand. Melissa was there. I am grateful for that. The funeral was held at a chapel in Northcote. About 80 people came, neighbors, old colleagues, friends from the library where she'd worked for 30 years. People from the community garden she'd joined after she retired, a woman who'd been her friend since primary school and had flown up from Dunedin. I wore the jacket. I had thought about buying a new one. I'd stood in the menswear section of a department store in Albany 2 days before the funeral, looking at suits, and then I'd thought about Evelyn and what she would have said. "You have a perfectly good jacket." Graham and I'd gone home and pressed the old one and polished my shoes and thought it would do. Brendan arrived with Melissa, wearing a suit that had clearly been made for him. He looked at me in the car park as we walked towards the chapel entrance. He looked at my jacket, the shoulders, the elbows, the age of it, and he said, loudly enough that the 3 or 4 people nearby could hear clearly, "Good Lord, Graham, is that what you're wearing? To your own wife's funeral?" I stopped walking. "It looks like something from a bin," he said. He laughed, a short, social laugh, glancing at the people around us. Evelyn would have been embarrassed. The world went very quiet. I am not by nature a man who responds quickly in moments of shock. I stood there in the gray morning with Evelyn's funeral chapel in front of me and my jacket too loose at the shoulders, and Brendan's voice still in the air, and I had no words at all. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at the ground. An older woman I didn't know put her hand briefly on my arm as she walked past. That was all. I said nothing. I walked inside. I sat in the front pew and I looked at the photo of Evelyn they'd placed near the flowers, a good one, from a trip we'd made to the Coromandel a few years back, her standing on a rock with the sea behind her, looking happy, and I spoke to her silently for the duration of that service. I told her what had just happened. I told her I hadn't known what to say. I told her I was sorry I didn't buy a new jacket. I thought I heard her say, very quietly, "You looked perfectly fine, Graham. You always do." After the service, at the gathering back at our house, Brendan stood near the kitchen and spoke to his colleagues and friends who'd come, and was easy and sociable, and poured wine, and seemed in every way a man at his own party rather than a man at his mother-in-law's funeral. At one point he came and stood beside me near the window. "Look," he said, more quietly than before. "I was only joking earlier. You know that. Don't be sensitive about it." I nodded. I didn't say anything. "Actually," he said, "while I've got you, Melissa, and I have been thinking, this house, it's quite big for one person, isn't it? And the Birkenhead market is doing well right now. It might be worth having a conversation about whether it makes sense for you to stay, long term. We know some good people in property who could advise. Help you downsize somewhere more manageable." I looked at him for a moment. "This is my wife's funeral," I said. He raised his hands. I know. Bad timing. Just worth thinking about. We're trying to help, Graham." I moved away to speak to Evelyn's friend from Dunedin. 3 weeks after the funeral, a letter arrived. I had known something like this was coming. In those last weeks at the hospital, Evelyn had said to me several times that she had organized things, that I shouldn't worry, that there was a letter with the solicitor, and I should make sure I went to see him after. She'd said it with a particular calm that I'd found both comforting and slightly mysterious, and I had been so focused on being present with her in those weeks that I hadn't asked her to explain what she meant. The solicitor's name was Patricia Nguyen, and she had a small practice in Takapuna. I met with her on a Wednesday morning. She was methodical and kind, and she took me through the documents in order, explaining each one clearly. Evelyn had written the letter herself, by hand, over several sessions in the last months of her life. Patricia gave me the envelope. I took it home and sat at the kitchen table and made a cup of tea and put it in front of me for a long time before I opened it. Graham, if you're reading this, then things have gone the way we both knew they probably would. And I want to start by saying, don't you dare feel guilty about anything. You were there every single day, and you held my hand, and that was all I ever wanted from you. Now, there are some things I need to tell you, and I need you to sit down properly and read this carefully, which I know you will, because you have always taken things seriously when they matter. You know we have always lived carefully. What you may not know, because I handled our finances for the last 15 years and I didn't always share the detail, which I should have done, and I'm sorry, is what careful living over 40 years actually becomes. The savings accounts. There is approximately $340,000 across the two accounts. The investment portfolio. I've been adding to this since 2009. It's currently worth approximately $880,000. Patricia has all the details. The Birkenhead house. Paid off in full, as you know. Valued most recently at $1.4 million. There is also the section in Wangare. Do you remember? We bought it in 2001 from that couple we met camping, when we thought we might build something up there one day. You probably forgot we still had it. The Wangare district has grown substantially. Patricia had it valued recently. It is worth approximately $620,000. Graham, what I am telling you is this. You are not a poor man. You have never been a poor man. We chose to live the way we lived because it was right and honest, and it was ours, and I would not change one single day of it. I want you to live now. Actually live. I want you to travel. You always said you wanted to see the south of France, and I always said maybe next year, and now I'm telling you, go. Take someone if you like. Go alone if you like. Buy yourself a decent jacket if you want one. Though for what it's worth, I always loved that old one. The house is yours entirely. I hope you stay in it for as long as it makes you happy and not one day longer. Regarding Melissa and Brendan, I love our daughter. I believe she is a good person who has, for a long time, made herself small to accommodate someone who takes up a great deal of room. I hope she finds her way through that. I have left her a letter separately, regarding Brendan specifically. I have left him nothing. And I want you to know that is a deliberate and considered decision that I made calmly and with full conviction. And I want you to respect it. Graham. 41 years. The Kaikoura fish and chips, Tapotupotu Bay, and your burned sausages, Queenstown, and the photo you still keep on the bedside table. All of it. Every single bit of it was the most wonderful life I could have imagined. I love you completely. Evelyn. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after I finished reading. Then I folded the letter back into the envelope. Put it carefully in the drawer where I keep things that matter. And I washed my cup and went out to the garden. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it is not a simple story. And I don't think simple stories are the true ones. I didn't go to Melissa and Brendan with the letter. I didn't call anyone. I sat with what Evelyn had told me, and with Patricia Nguyen's clear and thorough paperwork for several weeks. I made no announcements. I changed nothing visible about my life. Brendan rang twice in that period, both times raising the topic of the house in ways that were framed as concern but were, I understood clearly now, something else entirely. The second time he said with careful patience, Graham, I'm just saying that a man your age, alone in that house, on what I assume is a pension and a bit of savings, it doesn't make long-term financial sense. We want to look after you. I said I was managing fine. Look, he said, Melissa and I are doing well, but we're stretched with the Remuera mortgage and the business overheads. If you were to release some equity in the Birkenhead place, it could benefit everyone. Family, helping family. I thanked him for his concern and ended the call. I rang Patricia Nguyen the following Monday, and we began the process of making sure everything was properly structured, protected, and accounted for. I also, on Patricia's suggestion, had a quiet meeting with a financial advisor she trusted, a careful woman named Susan Parada, who had been organizing other people's futures for 30 years and who looked at Evelyn's portfolio with an expression of calm, professional admiration. "Your wife was methodical," Susan said. "Yes," I said. "She was. You're in a very secure position." "Good," I said. The event, when it came, was not something I planned or engineered. It happened at a family dinner at Melissa and Brendan's house in Remuera in late autumn, about 2 months after the funeral. It was, I think, intended partly as a reconciliation dinner, Melissa's attempt to restore some normal family rhythm after the difficult weeks that had passed. There were 4 of us. Melissa and Brendan, his business partner James and James's wife, and me. The conversation over dinner moved through the usual territory, the Auckland housing market. A holiday to Europe that Brendan and James were planning for their families the following year. Restaurant recommendations, a development project Brendan was working on in Tauranga. Brendan was in an expansive mood. 2 glasses of good wine in, he talked about the Tauranga project at length, about projected returns and timelines, and the particular skill involved in identifying undervalued opportunities. "The thing is," he said, at one point, looking around the table in a way that included me with a kind of deliberate tolerance, "most people just don't have the instinct for where value actually lives. They keep money in a savings account and call it prudent." He smiled at me. "No offense, Graham," I said, none taken. "They think because a house looks modest, the owner must be modest." He poured more wine. "Asset poor, cash poor, vision poor. That's most people, honestly." "Brendan," Melissa said quietly, "I'm just being honest. It's a dinner conversation. Graham understands." I picked up my water glass and looked at him thoughtfully. "Actually," I said, "I've been meaning to mention something. I met with my solicitor and my financial advisor recently to get everything in order after Evelyn." Brendan nodded with the patient expression of a man waiting for a conversation to catch up to him. "The house in Birkenhead," I said, "which you've suggested a few times I should consider selling, is valued at just under $1.4 million, and it's fully paid off. I intend to stay in it for as long as I choose." He stared at me. "Evelyn also held an investment portfolio," I said, "that she'd been building for about 15 years. And a section in Whangarei that we bought years ago and held on to. When you add up the savings accounts, the investments, the property," I paused, not for effect, or perhaps a little for effect, because I am human, "it comes to something in the range of $3.2 million. The table was quiet. James coughed. Brendan set down his wine glass. "Graham," he said. And then he didn't say anything else for a moment. "I wanted to mention it," I said, "because you've been kind enough to worry about my financial security, and I wouldn't want you to worry unnecessarily." Melissa was looking at her plate. I saw something in her expression, not surprise. Or not only surprise. Something that looked more like relief. That's Brendan stopped. He reset. He picked up his wine glass again, and then put it down again. "That's significant, Graham. I didn't realize." "No," I said pleasantly. "I know you didn't." He tried, over the next 20 minutes, to find his footing. He made several attempts at warmth, at shared enthusiasm, at suggestions that he would be glad to offer advice on managing a portfolio of that size, that he knew people who could help, that family should look after family. He said the word family 4 times in 10 minutes. I counted. I was polite throughout. I helped clear the plates. I thanked Melissa for a lovely dinner, which it had been. I said goodnight to James and his wife. At the door, Brendan shook my hand and said, with a sincerity that I am quite sure he felt genuinely in that moment, "Graham, I want to apologize for at the funeral what I said about your jacket. It was a terrible thing to say, and I felt awful about it. I looked at him. I thought about Evelyn straightening the lapels with both hands, about the chapel and the gray morning, and the woman I didn't know who had briefly touched my arm. Yes, I said. It was. And I walked to my car. That was 8 months ago. A fair amount has happened since. And some of it I did not expect. Melissa rang me the following week. We spoke for nearly 2 hours. She cried. She apologized for things she felt she should have done and said differently over the years. And I told her, honestly, that I had never for one moment blamed her for her husband's behavior, and that I would not start now. She told me that she had read her mother's letter. Evelyn had written one for her separately, as promised, and that it had changed things, changed her thinking. I didn't ask what Evelyn had written to her. That was between them. Melissa and Brendan are still together. I don't know what their private conversations look like. I know that she rings me every Sunday now, which she had not done for several years, and that she came and had dinner with me 2 weeks ago. And we sat at the kitchen table, and I showed her photos from the Coromandel trip, the one with Evelyn on the rock, and we looked through them together for the first time. As for me, I went to France in June. I am not a man who has done a great deal of international travel. I am not sure I managed it all with great elegance. I took a flight from Auckland to Singapore to Paris, and I sat in a window seat and watched the world below and thought about Evelyn saying, "Go, Graham, actually go." And somewhere over the Indian Ocean, for the first time since she died, I felt something that was not grief, or not only grief, something that was also, quietly, gratitude. For all of it. I spent 5 days in Paris, which overwhelmed me somewhat. Then I took a train south, and I spent a week in Provence. And I walked along roads between lavender fields in the morning light, and ate food that was very good, and sat outside in the evenings with a glass of wine. On the last evening, I found a restaurant in a small village, and I sat alone at a table outside, and I thought about the 41 years. The fish and chips at Kaikoura in the dark, the burned sausages at Tapotupotu Bay, the house in Birkenhead, the kitchen table, the quilt made from 30 years of fabric. I missed her every minute of every day. I think I always will. But I had the very clear feeling, sitting at that table in the southern French evening, that I was exactly where she had wanted me to be. I ordered another glass of wine. I wore a good jacket. I'd bought it before I left, a decent one, not extravagant, from a shop in Takapuna. I don't imagine Evelyn would have objected. She had said I could buy one if I wanted. When I got home, I found the quilt. Melissa had brought it over while I was away. She'd left it folded on the bed in the spare room, with a note that just said, "Mum made this for us. It belongs in this house." I picked it up and held it for a while. The flannel shirt, the curtain fabric from the flat in 1981, the scrap of Evelyn's mother's apron. I could feel the weight of all of it, all those years sewn together by hand, in the evenings, while I watched television and she sat in her chair by the window. Some things cannot be bought and do not need to be. There is something I want to say, because it might be useful to someone. We were not lucky in the way that people imagine when they hear a story like this. We did not win anything. We did not inherit from wealthy relatives. We did not make a brilliant investment at the right moment, or build a company, or have some particular advantage that other people don't have. We simply lived carefully, for a long time, without making it anyone else's business. We spent less than we earned, consistently, for decades. We made modest choices and held on to things. We paid off debt. We put money away every month, including months when we didn't feel like it and months when it seemed pointless. We made decisions based on what was true rather than what looked impressive. And here is the thing about living carefully. The thing Brendan never understood and cannot understand. Because understanding it requires a kind of patience he has not cultivated. You do not feel wealthy while you are doing it. You feel ordinary. You feel sometimes as though you are being judged by people who have newer cars and bigger kitchens and more impressive holidays, and you wonder briefly whether they are right about you. They are not right about you. A person's worth has never been in their jacket. It has never been in the car they drive, or the house they live in, or the restaurant where they take their family. Those things are the surface of a life, not the substance of one. Evelyn knew this. She knew it completely. She lived it every day of her life, without needing anyone to confirm it. I keep her photo on the bedside table. The one from Queenstown, where she's squinting into the sun and laughing at something I'd said. I look at it in the morning before I get up, and I think about the man she chose to spend 41 years with, a man with muddy boots and a borrowed jacket, and I think she made a very good decision. I hope, wherever she is still of the same opinion.